All right. Good morning, members, and welcome to the May meeting of the Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning Committee. Before we start the meeting proper, can I just make one or two comments? This is Robert Fritchley Simpson, Secondary Teacher Representative's last meeting on the committee, just to thank him for all the work he's done for the committee and wish him a very happy retirement. I can see the smile playing on his lips already. And also to welcome Sam Scobie, who's the new church representative on the committee. So welcome, Sam. I hope you enjoy the next few years on the committee. And before we begin, the director's got an announcement to make.
Thanks, Chair. With your forbearance and members' forbearance, I would like to just introduce a short presentation to committee. I know that this committee very much values education, has worked really hard over the years to be very supportive of investment in education, as has the Council. And recently at the Partnership Awards in London, the Cttee Learning Campus won an international award for Best Social Infrastructure Project. And we were up against different projects all around the world, so it was quite a magnificent achievement. And I've asked Claire Renton if she would present to Jeff as Chair and to the committee that award. Thank you.
And I understand the Dalbeattie campus is in the running for several other awards as well. And obviously with the new facilities coming in phase one of the Dumfries Learning Town, hopefully this is part of a cascade of awards. Fingers crossed. Okay. One further announcement before we start is we have a Lindsay Davis in the chamber, who's taken part in the Best Value Audit of the council. So welcome, Lindsay, and I hope you enjoy the session this morning. I think you were there on the EI committee last week. Environment, Economy, Infrastructure, where you were welcomed and asked to leave because there were 2 exempt items straight away. So we won't go down that route. There's no exempt items on this one. Okay, so starting the meeting. Nick, do you have any SEDERUNT apologies?
Yes, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillors Campbell, McComb, Wilson, and also from Reverend McFadden. We've got 24 members present at the start of the meeting.
Thanks, Nick. Just remind members that this meeting will be recorded and subsequently made available to the public for listening purposes. So, item 2, declarations of interest. Do you have any declarations? Ivor?
Chair, it's with regard to item 12, asked advice on this. I have some children that play some of the sports that are in there, but because it's a sort of raft, I think prices I don't need to leave the room.
Gail?
Thank you, Chair. Item 8, as Council Resources spokesperson, I've been involved in the negotiation of the overall quantum for local government, but I don't feel I need to leave the debate because this is specifically about Dumfries and Galloway.
Sorry, item 3, minute of the meeting of 27th of March 2018 for approval. Are we all happy with that? Agreed? Okay, thank you. So, moving on to the substantive items. Item 4 is the Education Authority Annual Report and Improvement Plan 2017-18, report by Director of Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning. This report sets out the evidence for the performance of the Education Authority for 2017-18 against the National Improvement Framework, which shows the strengths and ongoing improvements in outcomes for pupils. It also sets out the Authority's improvement plan for the year. What we will prioritise for the focus on closing the poverty-related attainment gap and achieving the best possible outcomes for our looked-after children. As we reach the end of another successful school session, pupils and staff should be commended for their hard work. There's an awful lot of data in this report, as is expected by Education Scotland. Key points are good attainment throughout our schools and improving number of pupils moving to further study or work. And we have Julian Brightson here to answer any questions. So I'll throw it open to questions. Katie?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, It's a really comprehensive report, so I mean, I won't speak to every bit on here because I could be here all day with it, but there's a couple of points that I wanted to raise. First of all, if I go on to page 42, we talk about the Educational Psychology Service. Now, in there, there's mention specifically for the Autism Support Service, which is very welcomed, and certainly I'm sure there's families and children throughout the region that are very grateful for that service. However, there's no mention of any dyslexia services within the region, and certainly with 10% of our population, myself included, I feel that there's just no mention of it. And certainly, speaking from a personal point of view, I know I'm not alone, and many children aren't actually diagnosed at primary school, and it's not until they're in higher education before they actually receive a proper diagnosis and actually the support that they potentially might need. So that was my first question. I don't know if you want to come back and I'll come back, or whether I sort of storm ahead, but maybe you want to answer that one first.
If I may, Chair, take that one first. It's a useful observation that there's no specific reference to dyslexia or for difficulties in reading and writing in the educational psychology remit. Clearly that service has a huge amount of experience and expertise to offer, but it's actually the responsibility of all class teachers to manage youngsters or to support young people who've got difficulties in reading and writing and spelling. Educational psychology did produce in 2016 a really useful guide for teachers, a very clear evidence-based report for teachers to support young people in reading, writing and spelling, and also an information leaflet signposting parents for where to secure their help. So you're right, there's not a dyslexia service per se, but all parents who've got concerns for their children's ability to access literacy, first of all, are directed to the class teacher, because they should be supported to do that, then to the head teacher, and then subsequently to the educational psychologist, if the class teacher feels that their needs are sufficiently complex. But you're absolutely right. There's not a legal definition of dyslexia, but we have a working definition in Dumfries and Galloway, and we are seeing more and more young people looking for support in improving their literacy skills.
Thank you. I mean, I think it would be useful to have a specific focus on dyslexia, and certainly if I tie into my next question, which I believe has been brought up at Area Committee, and I will bring it up again today, when we're looking at the tables of information, of which there's wealth of, but page 28, 29, we're starting at primary 1, with where our children are specifically looking at looked after children, children with additional support needs, and also the free meal entitlements children. And actually in primary 1 we start off in quite a good situation, but unfortunately in primary 4 that dips, and again in primary 7 it dips. By the time we get to high school it comes up again, and actually these are the reading, writing, and potentially it links in with the dyslexia. Are there children identified there that are struggling? Because there seems to be a big gap there, the gap between those that are achieving and the ones that aren't, and actually what's happening in the primary school between those when their children are coming into the education system and when they're leaving the primary. As I say, it seems the news gets better in high school, which is great, and we need to acknowledge that. But what's happening in the primary school situation? Because obviously we are asking our teachers to do more and more with potentially less resources, and just the previous answer of, well, we're signposting parents, but how we as a council, how can we support that?
Thank you. Two points, if I may. The first is that these are declaration of curriculum for excellence levels, and we know we as a region declare low, and I've spoken to area committees regarding that because it's a really interesting. We have no reason to be concerned about our curriculum for excellence levels because they catch up and we get to S3 and into our senior phase, and our attainment in senior phase is excellent. But there does appear to be a lack of confidence with some of our class teachers in declaring the curriculum for excellence levels, particularly in primary 7. But the Scottish Government standardised assessments that are coming in this year will give teachers another benchmark, something to go on. And we're building moderation across all of our schools to give our head teachers and class teachers the confidence to declare. I've used this example at Area Committee, so forgive me if I'm being repetitive, but to pass a higher, you need to have 50% to pass the higher. But some teachers have to make a judgment to when to pass the curriculum for excellence level. Do you require to complete the level, or are there aspects that you could move on without having completed? And it's that judgment about when the class teacher determines the level is completed that has led to us understanding that we are declaring low compared to the rest of Scotland. So that's the first aspect. The second is that we know that in some communities and our more deprived children, their language vocabulary is delayed. And we know that poverty is related in many cases to poor language acquisition, which in turn impacts on reading, writing and spelling. So there are a lot of work, there's a lot of programmes called Talking, Listening and Questioning, which is run with our speech and language therapists for all of our young people coming into school from nursery into primary 1 and 2. So we have got a range of evidence-based interventions for literacy. We've got our support of our educational psychologists, we've got our additional support for our learning teams, we have our speech and language therapy teams, and we are, particularly with writing, we are focusing on that. Writing in boys in primary 7 is an area of focus for us next year.
Dick?
Yeah, the subject of dyslexia, Chairman, is close to my heart. I think nearly 20 years ago, selected a cohort of teachers across Dumfries and Galloway to specialise in dyslexia, doing an intense postgraduate course. With, I think every Friday we went to Beeswing to do that course, and we had a level of expertise within the authority to deal with dyslexia, because classroom teachers, yeah, they need to have knowledge of it, but to really tackle dyslexia, you need the proper grounding in the techniques which help people with dyslexia. So do we still have that expertise within Dumfries and Galloway to provide specialist support to people who suffer badly from dyslexia? And do we have the backup? Do we have good technological backup? Because people with dyslexia need really good software to help them get through the curriculum and be able to survive it in their courses.
Julie?
Thank you. I would like to think that we do. I think it's certainly something we will not be complacent about, and I'm sure that there will be parents and children who continue to have concerns. But if we are aware of young people who feel that they're not getting the support that they need, then we will look into that. You mentioned children with severe dyslexia. Clearly, if there is an education improvement plan and multi-agency support required, then those children will have identified additional support for learning. They'll get extra time in the senior phase and they will have associated software. We do have a range of teachers who are specifically trained, but we feel that it is the duty and job of all teachers, all class teachers, to identify literacy difficulties and then be able to refer on to the more specialist multi-agency support if required.
Director?
Thanks, Chair. If we could maybe just make 3 points just to in terms of emphasis. First one, from what Gillian's saying, I think we're clear that maybe the gap that seems to be developing in P7 may not be a real one, because the standardised assessments were not showing that up, and that's partly to do with teacher judgments, which are subjective. The second issue, I think it's an important one to state, is that we would probably nonetheless anticipate some disadvantages that young people have manifesting themselves more greatly as time goes on, and therefore when you look at the LAC data in particular, I think the looked after children data in particular, that's interesting, because we do see that there's a wider gap as the youngsters get older, and again that may be maybe a very chaotic background. It could be a whole range of issues there. But we've got no doubt at all that that's an area in this report I think that we do need to look at further intervention for. Now we've got a new monitoring, we've got a new data monitoring for the LAC pupils, and by having this data-rich report, it lets us get a starting base to see how much we can improve over time. By definition, the pupils who we've identified as having additional support needs are likely to have achieved less, and that will be why they've been identified in the first place. So therefore, again, that's not so much about the gap between those with ASN and those without, but more about whether we can show improvement over the years as we go through. But I think there's a lot of data in here, and it's not a report we would normally write for members. It's not an easy one to read, in the sense that it's an awful lot of technical detail, but it's for Education Scotland. But I think having that report there, it's so data rich that you can see a lot of really good and helpful trends. And if I may say, literacy and numeracy in general terms were better than virtual comparators. The specific interventions in there around maths and wellbeing are bringing improvements. The school meals agenda, school meals data, really positive compared to the rest of the country. I think alarmingly for members, you might note that happiness decreases with age. Don't know if you picked that one up. That was through the study of the wellbeing. Positive destinations are up to 94%. The exclusion rates are half of what they were 5, 6, 7 years ago. So although there's a lot of detail in there, I think there are some real positive trends that can be picked up, but we mustn't be complacent about the areas that we need to improve on.
George?
Technology. Colin's answered some of my questions anyway. I know that you're on the case, absolutely. Firstly, reading through this document, it's huge, and it really brings home to us in real stark context, just the huge challenge you've got in the Education Authority. The particular issue I wanted to pick on was on the mental health and a broader appreciation of mental health. Even the word mental health, the two words mental health, maybe brings a stigma with it. But speaking from a professional capacity as well as a parent representative and speaking to friends who've got children in secondary school, it appears to be anecdotally and from evidence that it's an increasing issue of anxiety in school. And Colin rightly mentioned that it gets worse as they grow older. If you're parents with teenagers, you know that that's probably just a natural progress. But from my own personal experience and speaking to others, it is an increasing problem that needs to be addressed. And not attaining what a child could conceivably or expected to achieve. It's not just not getting any exams, but getting lower grades, and they would have been less happy, less confident in going forward, sort of thing. So I think it's a major issue. And one thing that probably parental representation can do is get parents more aware of the issues to help children at school through their teachers. And my query is, how can we get schools and parents as well as the children to engage better to try and overcome these problems at an early stage so that they don't become big problems. A friend recently has a child that just left in 6th year with very few qualifications, out all night, her mother worried sick, and she thinks it's just because she doesn't know where she's going. She's been unhappy in the last couple of years at school, she doesn't know where she's going, but she's left school, and both parents and child are really stressed. So I think, cut a long story short, what can we do more together as parents and teachers to try and address that issue?
Thank you, Chair, and for that question. I am also concerned about some of the anecdotal and less anecdotal evidence that we have of our young people, particularly in the senior phase. And I know it is a priority of this council that counselling in secondary schools will be brought forward, and that's certainly being brought forward with some urgency. I think it would also be fair to say that we are, as all of our public services reduce, there are thresholds changing with our NHS and our CAM services. That's not local to Dumfries and Galloway, that's a national issue, and it's my job to make sure we can ensure that if the thresholds change, we can fill the gaps for those families, and we need to work more closely with our third sector. We've had a number of very fruitful meetings with Soul Soup and other third sector providers, and Soul Soup will be providing mental health first aid training for teachers and managers in all our schools as from next year, because it is something we have to do together. We can't expect NHS to support us for all of these young people. We have to do more ourselves and working with parents to do so.
Rose?
Thank you, Chair. I was looking on page 45 regarding GERFEC support, and I think the termly network meetings, just at the second from the bottom there, they are really crucial meetings, and I do realise that a lot of staff have huge commitments regarding the welfare of children and families who've been under the GERFEC banner. However, if 64% of attendance is really low because there aren't many people at the meetings, and so that would mean that the meetings are small. And I also have spoken with Councillor Hagman previously regarding school nurses and the reduction in numbers of school nurses across the region. And just linked to that, on page 87, when we look at parental engagement, it's just 0.2% of parents regarding who are responding from special schools. So I'm just concerned again, Colin's answered some of this, but the theme of engagement. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. We are also aware, well, we're concerned about the reduction in school nursing also. We have had a number of meetings with our school nursing colleagues, and I'm very acutely aware of the barriers that they are facing. They have difficulties in recruitment, as do we, and they have had a recruitment drive, and they're trying to retrain, grow your own staff, as we do too, but these solutions are not immediate. So that's why we're working with our third sector to try and plug some of those gaps. The attendance at meetings we have to look at, and one thing we have reintroduced is specific dedicated administrative support for these child plans meetings. Professional staff should not be spending hours and hours trying to organise diaries and calendars. So we are aware that attendances are not as they should be, and we need to ensure that the meetings are organised swiftly and have a self-evaluation procedure. To be frank, I want to know if these meetings are not going ahead. We were not convinced that there was adequate escalation procedures. If the schools were concerned that meetings were not happening, the escalation procedures were perhaps not as robust as they should have been. So we're putting some monitoring in place for that.
Okay, so I've got Julie, followed by Ivor, Dick, David McKee and Robert. Julie?
Thank you. It was really just to follow up, Gillian, on your information about staff declaring low levels. I mean, I think as a primary teacher and as a representative for primary teachers here, I have to weigh in on that one. It's not about staff confidence. It's about staff wanting to make sure that children have a good grounding. Because if we have gaps in those early years, if we have gaps before secondary school, then they will show up in secondary school and your attainment will drop. So I think it looks as though we underreport levels, but it's because staff want to be confident that children have actually got the basics across the board.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think the point, I suppose, it's not the why that we were talking about. I suppose what we're just trying to highlight to members is that the reality may be that, based on certainly standardised assessment, that these levels of judgment that are made at the moment are slightly below where the children actually are. So it's not really about any concern that staff don't have confidence there, but it's more about trying to make sure that the members understand that those levels may be below where they will appear once they're benchmarked properly. That's all. So I take your point. Okay.
Can I, sorry, and one of the other points, Julie, absolutely understand. Members have highlighted why levels are very different in different clusters and in different areas, as they are. And I think it's no criticism. It's just a recognition that if you're moderating within a cluster, you have that benchmark, but you might not see the work from another cluster. And that's what we're trying to do. But thank you.
Ivor? No.
Thank you. I was looking at page 28 when you were looking at the children achieving first level and the data on the page before, looking at listening and talking and how that has improved. Well, we're now several years into delivering TLQ throughout our early learning and childcare settings and also into primary 1. And it was interesting to note that those gains appear to be being sustained right through to primary 4, which I thought was really good. And it shows that, you know, something that we are doing in that early level that's play-based, that's not about scoring children and testing, is actually having a really positive impact. And it would be good to see that continue throughout the school, because the TLQ programme has been developed and it can go throughout the school and it leads into writing. So I wasn't sure if you were aware of that.
Sorry, thank you. I was not aware that there was an extension into writing, but I was aware of the very significant gains in the TLQ programme. It really has been, the 3 waves of the training have been very successful. Only 60% of our schools, as I see, have had specific TLQ training, and that's certainly what I'll be looking at extending next year.
Ivor?
Thank you. It's getting back to these achieving CFE, 4th level, etc. So have we actually had a between 10 and 14% in S3 increase? Or are the kids still doing the same thing, but we now have more confidence in assigning them, which means actually we could have been sitting in 2016 with 50%, we're now sitting, could be sitting 45, so it might be going down. We can't tell that because it's a subjective rather than objective test there. Because I think, this was the first year, or last year was the first year, there was a slight dip in attainment. Now, the director will have heard me on many times before about the curricula for excellence, and my reference to the curriculum for mediocrity. Now, my child sort of came through the first tranche of that, sat our tests last year, and that was the year that the figures dipped. But I think there's a slight increase now, and that would suggest to me that were those figures a one-off blip because it's a new course and it's going to be difficult for everyone to get into, or has it just been a bad year for that cohort of kids going through? On a positive note, I did welcome the fact that you're now looking into closing the gender gap between boys and girls with writing, reading, etc., because it seems to be that boys don't do as well in those areas. We sort of do quite well in numeracy compared to the girls, but the rest we do lag behind.
Julian?
In terms, I think there was two separate statistics referred to there in terms of curriculum for excellence levels in S3 and then the SQA examinations. First year of the curriculum for excellence levels were experimental. So it was defined as experimental data. I think there's still debate as to whether they're going to be experimental data this year, but it is still early. So yes, the S3 data has gone up quite considerably. We were a wee bit concerned, not so much Dumfries and Galloway, but across Scotland, that the S3 data was a wee bit less rigorous that in terms of reporting, probably because our secondary colleagues were less experienced at assessing S3 in that way. But we've done a lot of work in moderation, and there is a reported increase. So whether that's a real increase or a reported increase, I think the proof's in the pudding in terms of SQA attainment, which has continued to go up. So in terms of your specific question about the dip, and then I think the 5-year trend is very positive in all of our measures. And certainly if there are specific subjects or specific areas that you would like us to look at, we can do so. But overall, the last 5 years, at both 1, 3 and 5 hires, our attainment has continued to rise.
So I've got Dick, followed by David, Robert and Jim. Dick?
Thanks, Chair. I was just looking around the room to see if I was the unhappiest person in the place, but apparently there's more people with grey hair than me, so that's given me a lot of comfort. But we'll take you back to the most happy people about is the early intervention, and we've got some impressive figures there for nursery age children. I'd probably like to learn a bit more about TLQ, perhaps. But the figures here are very impressive. An average nursery children age showed 2 years, 1 month improvement for information, 1 year, 3.
Can I interrupt? Could you just say which page you're on? Because I can see people.
So page 9. And it's halfway down the shortened page. Page 19, sorry. Dyslexic maybe, or just numeric. 19, sorry. 19. So an average children at nursery showed 2 years, 1 month improvement for information, 1 year, 3 months for grammar, and 5 years improvement was the maximum change achieved for information, which is quite good for children who maybe were only aged 4 years at the time this was measured. Just a question, is there any caveats about this? These are excellent information. Obviously, when you get targets, you teach towards the assessments. Anything about that, and how long have we been collecting data for the children of this age?
Might defer to Julie as the expert on this, I have to say, which is unusual, I know, for this committee, but I know TLQ has been at least 4 years, Julie perhaps longer, but I don't have any knowledge of any unintended consequences of the TLQ programme. The reports seem to be generally very positive, and certainly the gains seem to be sustained. May I, Chair, hand over to Julie for...
Thank you. Basically what we do for TLQ is children are assessed in their preschool year and they're showing 10 picture cards which they're asked a specific question on. So it might be, what is the mother doing? It might be something as simple as, what has just happened? And we write down what the children say. And we do score it according to speech and language therapy criterion that we've been given. And it gives you a vocabulary age for children, so an information age and a grammar age. And the children that you include in the group to do the activities are children who've got a large disparity between those two scores, or who are scoring below their actual age. So although it's saying one child made 5 years of gain, they might not actually have appeared to be their age. It scores as low as 3 years, 6 months. So if you appear below that level, that's how you can make a gain of 5 years and still only be age appropriate at the end of it. It basically is a 20-week programme where children are taken in a little group and you play with them. There are games and activities that are standardised, so that anybody accessing TLQ, if you said to them what week you were on, they would know what the activities were. And the children, certainly in my setting, absolutely love taking part in it. And they will come and ask, when are we doing TLQ? And they're disappointed that we've finished it. And that obviously I've just finished assessing the children. Our greatest gain this year was 4 years. And we've got children who are sitting age equivalent of 6, 7 years now, who are only age 4 and 5. So it's a really useful programme, and what you do from it, what's within it, you carry out in the playroom as well, so that when you're reading stories, you ask questions about who was in the story, what happened, and it's getting children to talk and to build their vocabulary, basically. But it's a great activity-based session for children.
David?
Hi, thanks, Chair. Given the modern technology we've got today, and I know some people with youngsters, even before school age, they get out of bed and the first thing they do is get an iPad stuck to their hand, and that's them for the day almost. Do we feel that that has any effect on the education of these youngsters? Does it help them or does it hinder them? Because they concentrate so much on these, I'll not have better start swearing, these iPads, that they'll hardly talk to anybody, let alone anything else. So I just wonder, have you any idea what sort of effect that has?
I suppose it would be hard to judge. We've got 19,000 young people. It might be different for all of them, but what we can do as a committee is scrutinise what the overall attainment is and what impact there is. And as Gillian's already said, over the last 5 years, we've seen significant improvements in attainment. And therefore, you've got to correlate that with the idea that we're not doing their kids a terrible harm, but in fact that young people are improving all the time in terms of their grades. So that should give some reassurance to you, Councillor.
Robert?
Jerry, just to pick up a wee point you made earlier on about counselling service being introduced, presumed into the secondary sector. Would it be the intention that that's a standalone service, or would it be integrated to the current pupil support structures that we already have?
Sorry, it's specifically aligned with youth work, actually, so that there will be additional support through mental health first aid for the pupil support teams in school, but the introduction of counselling in schools will be aligned to Mark Malloy's team within youth work.
Jim?
Hey, thanks, Chair. It's about supporting learners on page 41, and where we're talking in the paper about for those needing additional support in 2017, 30%, a third of the whole population comes from SIMD quintile 1. And yet further down the paper we talk about the challenges and its continued pressure in terms of available staff and resources, and a difficulty in evidencing fair and equitable allocation of available resources across schools. How do we as members know what's happening? Because we never, or at least I can't recall when we last got a school by school flow or chart on how schools, especially this particular group of pupils, are achieving school by school, just to give us comfort that and I realise it's very much a very school-based issue. And I wouldn't want this to be a situation where we identify any particular school as having a particular challenge. But I think it'd just be useful for members to know how all of the schools are managing and whether or not there are particular issues in some schools. And the only other thing which has been maybe a bit pedantic, we used to get a glossary at the back that would help us unravel all the acronyms that are in the paper, and it seems to be missing this month, and I take it that's just a clerical issue this month.
Gillian, and I do agree about the acronyms. I was searching backwards and forwards throughout the report.
I think that's useful. Certainly we have taken, since this was published, we did consult through the Parent and Carer Forum, and so we've still got some work to do to take. This particular version was not, I don't think, plain English as it should have been, Mel, but certainly before it goes to print, it is a document which should be accessible to parents and pupils, so certainly all the acronyms will be picked up. All our school-by-school data is public, so I know it can sometimes be difficult for people to find, but it is on Parent Zone, and all of our curriculum for excellence levels are published by Scottish Government. But I want to try and make the story, rather than having league tables, because the risk is that you publish league tables and overall story's lost. But we met with James Pocock and his team yesterday to try and create a ward-by-ward interactive map so that you can actually see that live. And it's certainly something we're keen to explore, so that the information such as catchments, enrolments, attendance, exclusion, they're already on this particular, the name escapes me at the moment, Open Data, the Open Data source that James has created, and we're going to introduce school level attainment to that. And then we can see the overall picture of poverty, attainment, attendance, exclusion and employability at a ward level.
Katie?
Thank you, Chair. And just first of all, before going to my question, I just want to refer to the counselling service led by Mark Malloyne. I think that is welcomed. I note on page 50 that actually referrals to CAMS went up in 2017 by 100. Obviously, we don't have the data for this year, but I understand there is significant stress on that team, and if there are issues with the school nursing team, that is going to add to that and exacerbate that. So it's welcome that we do have a strategy, but actually it might be something to come back to in the future on that one, which I won't go any further. However, it sort of relates. I just want to ask about young carers. It came up in Wigton Area Committee when we were looking at the Health and Social Care Performance Report, and it mentioned specifically carers, and it had in brackets young carers were excluded. So I asked about that, and I got told no, it's under SIPO, young carers. So we had the Carers Scotland Act from 2016 come into force on the 1st of April of this year. So how are we supporting our young carers within our school? Because we do mention about post-school destinations on page 63, and young carers are mentioned there, but there, I've not, I may have missed it because it is such a large document, but I can't see any other. What support are we giving our young carers? Because these are, such vulnerable children who have got such a responsibility. And do we have things in place specifically for the young carers? Because certainly my understanding that the care strategy that was adopted by the IJB doesn't include young carers. So my concern is let's not let these children fall beneath, between the gaps. How can we ensure that they are actually included?
Chair, if I may, the carer strategy that went to the IJB also came for information to Children's Services Executive Group, and we've had fairly regular reports on that from both the member of staff who's in social work and in health. Very clear that the young carers are part of that strategy, and very clear that the first instance communication is a critical issue. So we've had quite good reassurance about the communication that goes out to school at the moment. Schools should know who their young carers are. Some of the work thereafter, as you know, through the strategy is about what support you can get and what resource and what provision there is. But I just want to give you a reassurance, Councillor, that young carers are very much part of the wider strategy. Okay.
So if we move to the recommendations, can we agree 2.1? And can we note 2.2 and agree 2.3 and Gillian had a very interesting suggestion for a members' seminar, which I think would pull quite a lot of information together right across the council. So, Gillian, do you want to give us your suggestion?
Thank you, Chair. We're often asked regarding employability and positive destinations, and it often falls between two committees. So the Employability and Skills Service clearly reports the EEI committee, and the KPIs for employability report here. So if it was helpful, Lynn and I would be happy to organise a member seminar. There's a lot of changes in employability and skills in terms of the leaver destination statistics and the really good work that we're doing in conjunction with the DYW. So if the Chair was minded, we would agree a member seminar perhaps at the beginning of the new session.
Members happy with that? I think it's a very good idea to pull all this information together, and I think to throw it open to all members of the council, because obviously they'll all be interested in the same degree. So we're happy with that.
Developing young workforce.
You know that, Gail. Okay, so we're happy to go along with that. Okay, right. Thanks, Jerry. So if we move on to item 5 on page 113. Whilst appointment procedures are a delicate responsibility of the local negotiating committee for teachers, we're seeking members' agreement to a unified set of procedures rather than 3 separate ones, and to agree the composition of the selection panel for deputy head teacher and head teacher interviews. And John Thinn's here to speak to it. Is there anything you want to add to the paper, John?
I'll be very brief, Chair. The paper hopefully is fairly self-explanatory, members, but in essence we did have previously 3 different sets of procedures, one for principal teacher, one for deputy and one for head teacher. The LNCT felt that it would be appropriate to bring those procedures into one. Part of that rationale was because of the disparity that we were starting to find between the different policies being implemented at different times. We also had and continue to have a bit of a recruitment challenge in terms of moving people into senior leadership posts within Dumfries and Galloway schools, indeed across Scotland. So therefore, we felt it would be appropriate to try and demonstrate the various steps within the challenge in terms of the rigour of the processes. So that was part of it, and also to give our staff members the opportunity to see what those steps actually were without having to go over to different places. We also have a view in terms of the tackling bureaucracy agenda. Currently, the policies and procedures we have tend to be, in particular the head teacher one, tends to be quite bureaucratic and take quite a period of time to go through from start to finish. And so there was a view that we could potentially speed that up slightly by looking at the availability, and that's where we've given the options in terms of the sort of make-up panel for the deputy and the head teacher one. So if we could move that further forward and quicker, then that would obviously reduce the risk to the council in terms of being able to make appointments. And I think the other part I'd like to highlight just now is the temporary appointments we have. Over the past wee while, we're required often to make temporary appointments for illness, staff moving out in secondments and so on. And so we wanted to bring that to the front end of the paper as well, so that when we are making temporary appointments, we can do that fairly efficiently and quickly. We do have an acting head teacher pool, but when did we use that? You know, we needed to get some clarity around about that so that we're being open and fair and transparent for all our members. I think the other thing to bear in mind, members, is that parents have absolute responsibility and right to be involved in the appointment procedures for heads and deputies. And again, I was delighted to share the policy with our parent forum earlier on, the proposed policy earlier on, to seek their views in terms of their involvement. And what we're suggesting is that for members that we do go to a single streamlined one policy to cover all the promoted post-appointment procedures within Dumfries and Galloway schools, and to give the decision-making about the composition of the selection panel for the deputy and for the head teacher back to the parent council in consultation with elected members to decide on who they felt was most appropriate to be representing the school in terms of the selection process.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make a few observations and then I'll probably come to some questions. And obviously you'll appreciate and respect that this is coming from a level of experience, past and present. I think one of the positives of what we do in Dumfries and Galloway, and it's been anecdotally sort of reported back at interviews, is that we do have one of the most robust processes in Scotland. We've had external candidates coming in who felt that it was as rigorous and robust as they'd experienced anywhere. And I think it's really important that we continue to have that. We are appointing senior managers. I know we call them head teachers in schools, but they are essentially senior managers and senior officers of the council and have a very important role to play. So I don't want to see any dumbing down. I think streamlining is a good word, as long as it doesn't lead to dumbing down. The other observations that I would make is that having done it for 6.5 years, I totally appreciate the workload that it puts on the chair and vice chair. I think that that's a fairly onerous task at certain times of the year, but it tends to be just at certain, and I'm afraid it goes with the job. I think for elected members at local level, and as I say, I'll come to some questions in a moment, I think it's incredibly important that we have local elected member representation where possible, whether it be a neighbouring ward or whether it be your own ward. Nobody knows their school in their area better than the elected members, and if they don't, they damn well shouldn't be an elected member. And again, I think if you're having struggles getting councillors to come along to interviews, then that's an issue for the councillors, not for you. I think we're elected to represent our communities, and I think it's incredibly important that we're seen to be involved in making very high-level decisions about who runs our schools. And I believe there's nothing more important than that. Now, as far as questions go, as I say, I'm not overly keen to see elected member involvement dumbed down or going to one elected member instead of two. I think we should almost maintain the status quo, and I think the options, there's probably a middle ground between option 1 and option 2. I appreciate the streamlining looks good, but of course it's not going to be the same for principal teachers as for head teachers anyway. So really the questions that I would come to is that on page 114 at 3.7, it says the revised procedures remove the requirement for elected member input into deputy head teacher appointments. But when you go to the table at 121, it makes reference to elected members. So are we removing the need for them, or is it embedded that they have to be there? Because my preference would be that they have to be there, and that's slightly conflictory at the moment. And I think we do need to have at least one elected member, as I say, whether local or a neighbour based. And the other point that I quite like clarification on is, and you'll have to excuse me a moment while I'll just read it again, is the parent council should agree with elected members what the representation should be. What exactly does that mean? Does the parent council, and forgive me, does the parent council dictate whether they want 4 parent council members and only 1 elected member? Is it something that we have control over? Because I do feel that it has to be very much a joint working, everybody working for the betterment of the school. So it's not about the parent council telling us what to do or us telling them what to do. And I just think that that particular phrase is slightly conflictory. And I will come to recommendations once the debate is over.
John?
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. If I just go back to the aspect about the rigour, absolutely. And I know that our elected LNCT representatives were very keen that rigour was very much part of the process. These guys are the guys that are being managed by the senior managers, and you're right to describe them as senior managers for the council. Certainly the highest salaries of the council, so therefore they have the responsibility, and are chief officers for the council as well in that respect. We have introduced a psychometric assessment as part of the process in the first interview for a head teacher, and so that will be an increased rigour in terms of the process. But we don't feel that we need to do all of the parts of it, because we feel that the 3 parts that we've described there will cover that and make sure that we do have the right people who are meeting the standards, the appropriate standard to lead the schools appropriately. And we absolutely, and I know that with the Parent Forum, when we had the conversation, and certainly with the LNCT, that ward member representation was absolutely crucial to the appointment, because they are the people who are working together in that community. And I certainly don't see, to go to your sort of second question, I don't see the PCs, the Parent Council, sorry, acronym there, Parent Councils dictating the composition. We would very much see it as a conversation that's had at a Parent Council meeting. Now, for the deputy head teacher one, for example, the head teacher of the school would facilitate that meeting, and the Parent Council and elected members would agree what that composition would look like. When it's for the head teacher position, an officer of the council would be working with the Parent Councils to agree what that composition would be like. So it would be a consultative and agreed process. It wouldn't be one group dictating to another group what that would actually look like.
Follow up on that, and my apologies for using the word dictating. As I say, I think it's just a slightly misleading paragraph that it would imply that the parent councils would make a decision on who they required at. But I still think that within that there needs to be an equality So we do have a fair representation right across the board, and I think that's incredibly important.
Well, I would certainly agree with that. I don't think there's any reason for diluting the influence of elected members on these appointments. I think they're very, very important. I've attended a number of which you have chaired, and I think they've gone extremely well. The right choices have been made, and I felt very confident with the briefing that we got and everything else that we were able to make that choice, and I believe that we should maintain that. So I honestly don't support any revised procedures, and I certainly think that the option 1 at 3.8 and option 1 at 3.9 should be the ones we stay with here. They're proven, they're working well, they have the confidence of the elected members, and also I hope the confidence of the teachers who are being looked at, and I don't think there's any reason for changing it.
George?
We obviously we've been in communication and discussion with this, and acknowledging Gail's concerns totally. One thing we've found, and I've had experience on various selection panels, is what fundamentally is required, because parents don't do this a lot. They'll just do it once or twice in a lifetime, sort of thing. So, but the backup that John and other educational officers give to parents is really good. And parents do take this really, really seriously, and good parent councils will have a balance, and they'll discuss who's the most appropriate parent to actually sit on these things. Some elected members, with all due respect, don't have a great knowledge of the schools. Actual parents with children at the school have a real inherent knowledge of the school. I'm not saying councillors don't, but not all councillors will have that knowledge, and I've seen that through experience as well. I've been in one particular case where Jeff had to make the decision ultimately, and that was, for me, not something that you would aspire to. I think the conversation should have been on until we had a decision without putting pressure on the chair to make that decision. I'd like to think most parent councils would be responsible enough to agree that 1 or 2 councillors should be present. Now, maybe the wording could be more definitive, but I'd like to think that the responsibility of parents would be such that they want a selection panel that's representative and can look at it from all sides, because parents can be too involved. So it's important that there's an objective side of it as well, and the educational officers have got a great role to play in that and giving parents guidance. But I would say that from my own personal experience and speaking to other parents, that anybody that's been on these selection panels has taken it very, very seriously. So I think the balance is just about right, albeit it may need to give some guidance on so that, I mean, you can't not allow for a particular school to get the wrong type of parents on these with too much opinion. So it's important that there's moderation there. So I think where you are with it's not far off, but maybe just needs a wee bit of the wording maybe clarified so there's greater guidance, because getting back to the fact that parents don't do this very often, so they need a bit of guidance. Okay.
Ian?
Thank you, Chairman. My point is, I think Gail actually raised it, but I don't think she got the answer to it. There does appear to be a bit of confusion in the paper. When you go to page 118, it says the final interview. It gives a list of the selection panel, and elected members are not included in that. And yet, if you go to the next page, the top of 121, elected members appear there. So I think we need to be quite specific in that.
John?
Okay, thank you for raising that. Not a deliberate mistake, but obviously this has gone through a fairly lengthy consultation process, and the procedures that were sent out have subsequently been updated. The paper's been updated, but the papers themselves, the appendix with the policy and procedures, hasn't necessarily been updated until we got a final decision from committee today. So that would reflect whatever we were going to put into it. What we had there was a consultation at one draft, which is obviously tagged into the papers for today, Councillor Blake. Okay, thank you for that.
As has been said, I mean, it is incredibly important we get the right head teachers into position on all these schools. And I've taken part in, I don't know, seems to be hundreds of interview panels. And I do appreciate it is difficult at times to populate and getting the right balance within that. So I do I think it's also important that the professional staff have an input as well, which at the moment they don't have a formal vote. And I think it is important, since they're there all the way through the process, that they do have a formal vote within the selection procedures. I've got no one else. Gail?
Sorry, it's just a couple of supplementaries again on the back of Ian. You still haven't answered, are elected members involved in the process or not? You know, and we need an absolute definitive yes or no. And just going back to the sort of agreeing who the representation would be, as contained at option 2 at 3.8, you said that all parties would meet to agree the representation. If we can't arrange for all parties to meet to do a head teacher interview or a deputy head teacher interview, how on earth are we going to get everybody together to agree who we can't get to come to the interview at the next stage? You know, that's a level of process that I think is going to cause you even more problems. Because as I say, if we can't get us all together, parent councils, elected members, chairs, vice chairs, officers, on the same day, we sure as hell aren't going to get us to come to a 10-minute meeting to decide who's going to be on that panel. So I think we need to have a think about that, and on that basis, I would stick with the status quo just now in second, John.
John?
Okay, thank you for that. I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to close a gap here, and I think the gap is that we are certainly absolutely happy elected members' full involvement as they see fit within both deputy and head teacher. We certainly have the chair of SIPL or vice chair of SIPL who will be on the head teacher. They will be the chair of that panel. And what we're suggesting is that that can be supplemented with other ward members within that panel. And for deputy, the choice would come to the schools themselves with the sort of key stakeholders to decide what that representation would look like. More than happy to look at a change in terms of the wording under option 2s for both deputy and head teacher appointments. I think that would be important. But what we'd like to see, I think, is that when we have the training, where where officers come to meet with parent councils to discuss the appointment process, that's where the decision would be made, so that people have then got a clear idea of when diary dates are being set, what the process will be, who needs to block out diary dates. What we've got just now is a gap, and what's happening is we're agreeing with parent councils what's going to happen, what the process will be, when it will happen, but then we're trying to get elected member diary dates sorted out at a later date. If they're not at the original parent council meeting, that's when we've got that kind of free-falling time, if you like. So we're trying to piece that bit together. So if we can agree that the decision's made at the meeting, the training meeting, and then we know what the representation is going to be like and who's going to be representing the school, then it gives us, as an administrative centre, the opportunity to make sure we're contacting the right people at the right time and everybody's already got those dates in their diaries.
I think Gail's concern is that, I'm saying it could happen, what will happen is that the parent council could say, well, we want all 5 members to be parent council representatives, so we don't need any councillors. So I think we need to have at least a minimum of probably 2 council members.
I think you're absolutely right, Jeff, and I think my concerns are that I totally appreciate the need to streamline this, and I would agree that it's absolutely necessary. I think what we have in front of us today is not absolutely 100% what we need to ensure that the parent councils are empowered and get what they require from it, that we have the absolute scrutiny and overview of elected members and the responsibility that we have. And I think we're nearly there, but my concern is that what you're discussing just now is utterly operational. You know, we have administrators in central office who are meant to coordinate parent councils and ourselves. That's an operational matter. That's got nothing to do with setting a new policy. Because believe me, if we're not doing it right now, under our current policy, simply changing the policy is not going to make it any better. If we have issues with elected members' diaries, we have issues. So we have to keep going until we find an appropriate date. I think on that basis, depending on John's view, I think we need to defer this and have a wee bit more engagement with parent councils and elected members. I haven't seen anything of this, and I'm the education lead for our political group. And I just think it's such an important thing with the education bill coming through and the empowerment of head teachers. I know that we've had some of the lightening of the recruitment process for that if we're going to put something in place, we only changed it 3 years ago. Another 3 months is not going to make a blind bit of difference. So if John would remove his motion, I would suggest that we defer and just come back and look at it properly.
Ronnie?
I understand a lot of concerns here. I haven't got as much concerns about, as others regarding this. I think it does need a revamp, the way we actually do, because, for whatever reason, and whatever Gail says about counsellors do have busy diaries sometimes, and they do have a lot of clashes, and it's sometimes very difficult to get a member involved in it, and it's quite frustrating and quite time delaying, and not good for the schools themselves to have not have a meeting to discuss that. The option 2, I understand about the wording and whether you have a minimum. Some of them elected members, it might be 1 or it might be 2, and it all depends on that. But again, if you have a minimum of 1, for example, there's a maximum of 3 in option 2, head teacher, chair, quorum minimum of 1, maximum of 3 made up from elected members, preferably school board, and representatives from the parent council. So if you had a minimum of 2, in that case, you would only allow 1 parent council member on it. Whereas if you had a minimum of 1 elected member, and the possibility is you could even have 3 elected members on it if that's the way it goes. But at least you would have 1 and not overbearing you'd have representation from the parent council members within that as well. So there might be a wee look at the wording on that. I don't know. I have no great concerns about this, and I think it is competent for officers to have a vote in this. We rely heavily on officers. They do have a lot of expertise. They do have a lot of contact with both parent council, with the educational needs of the children within individual schools and the particular circumstances of individual schools and what's required in there. And I think that expertise is invaluable, and sometimes we don't give enough weight to that. I know that I rely heavily because I have a relationship with schools, but again, it's not an everyday educational expertise I have. I have an outside knowledge, I have an education committee knowledge, I have a council knowledge, and I have other local knowledge regarding the wards. But in all cases, you've got to take that expertise into and give it the weight it deserves. So I've no real barriers to going option 2 with maybe the rewording of elected members.
Katie?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, it is a slightly confusing report, and I think one of the things that makes it confusing is we're talking about option 1 and 2, but are we talking about option 1 and 2 for the head teacher or for the deputy head teacher? Because they're both all in the sort of same block of writing, and actually they're quite different. I'm just looking for clarification that option, and if I look at the head teacher, which is 3.8, not looking at 3.9, option 1, that the final interview remains as constituted. So is that our current status of where we're at? Which, if my maths is correct, we've got 7 people on that panel, plus 1 with the representation for denominational schools. But with that, the officer has no voting rights. If we're looking at option 2 on 3.8, we're actually looking at a maximum of 5 plus representation, plus the education officers, which takes us up to 7, plus a potential. So it's the same number of people that are potentially on the panel there. And actually, I don't see a dilution. I understand the concern that we do need to have elected members represented, but certainly option 2, when we're looking at the head teachers, we can have a maximum of 5 members there. There's not 5 members in any ward, so we could still have that elected member input. And I think what's happening with this debate just now is there's actually just confusion on the way the report is written, because actually I believe option 2 does actually cover that. It is slightly different when we look at the deputy head teacher at 3.9, where option 2 actually takes us down to 1 and 3. And this is where I think the confusion is coming here, because we're talking about 1 and 3, but that's actually for a deputy head rather than a minimum of 3 up to 5 for head teachers. So I would just like clarity when we're debating here, when we're mentioning these numbers, what are we talking about, a head teacher or a deputy? Because actually they're 2 distinct things, although they're written all together. So it's just clarification, really, please.
Director.
Okay. Members, I think what's really important, and what I'm hearing here, is that in terms of making these incredibly important decisions about head teachers, that we need to have parents, counsellors and officers working together very carefully. That has worked very well so far. I do think that members will accept on a professional basis that there's a need for a little bit of tweaking of what we've currently got, because operationally we are finding it a little bit difficult to make appointments in the time frame that we would like to, and that represents a risk for the council. On the other hand, based on what I'm hearing from members in different groups today, there's a little bit of confusion about exactly what we're saying here and what level of reassurance there is in terms of member input. So I would like to suggest as director, but it's clearly we're in members' hands, that rather than maybe taking a vote on something where there's a little bit of confusion, the officers go back and rework this paper for you, taking account of everything that's been said today, to still deliver a streamlined version of what we've got currently, but maintain the best of what we already had, but be clearer about the commitment to both members and parents in that, and really we'd have to bring that paper back to you after the recess. Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, given that we are going into the recess, we won't be making very much in the way of appointments in the meantime, so Ivan?
Chair, it's just if you're looking for things that could clarify points, it's with regard to the quorum. Now, under our standing orders, we have a quarter of the members make the quorum of this committee. Now, does the quorum, just for when you bring your paper back, minimum of 3, is that 3 out of all the people within that box, from chair, elected members, parent council, 2 representatives, which could actually end up as the chair plus 2 council reps from the Education Authority, or is it 3 from the body? And the same with the deputy head, you're looking at a quorum of 1, that could be the chair. There are people who agree that best form of committees is a quorum of 2 where 1's absent, but, you know.
So again, I'd repeat, I think we've heard what members are saying today, some of the clarifications that you would like. We'll go back and work with our colleagues on the LNCT to come forward with a revised paper in September, which still philosophically attempts to take us into a more streamlined version, but maintains the points that you would want and takes into account what's been said today, if that's agreeable to you.
To complete the debate, I've got George who wants to speak. Katie, if these points that you want to be taken into account on the revised paper, and John as well.
Yeah, I don't want to labour on this, just to say that from a parent's perspective, we welcome elected members being on the quorum without any shadow of a doubt, because you're elected, you represent the whole community. Parents would value that input, so we believe there should be at least a minimum of 1 councillor. And the only other comment I would make if we're reviewing things is that if somebody's elected chairman of a school council, they get adequate training on these key issues like appointments that are such an important issue as head teachers, because it's people's careers they're working with, so we need to make sure that the parent council chairman at the very least acknowledges that when he's taking on the chairman's role, that this is one of the roles that they may have to undertake along with inspections and things like that. It's maybe something that's lacking in the parent councils that we need to address, that if anybody takes on the responsibility of the chairman of a parent council, and these are some things that they have to take on board, it's their responsibility.
Katie?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to check that by deferring this and getting a report coming back, it's not going to affect detrimentally the appointment of a new head teacher at Stranraer Academy and then subsequently at the Douglas Ewart, which I'm aware that both these positions are going to be advertised and they're going forward. So it's just to check that actually for Stranraer Academy and the Douglas Ewart that it doesn't affect that.
John?
Yeah, absolutely. We've already started the process for Stranraer Academy, so it was already in the existing policy and procedures. Obviously, if we do affect a change, it's from the change that we'll change any appointment procedures at that point, okay?
Finally, John?
Thank you, Chairman. I think my proposal has been well debated, and I'm quite happy to withdraw from that, and as Gail has suggested, and go ahead for get a clarification of the proposal.
And we'll agree to defer the paper anyway to the September meeting. Members happy with that?
Yeah.
Right, so moving on to item 6 on page 177, the school session dates for 2019-20, 2021 and 21-22. We're seeking members' approval of the school session and holiday dates for the above sessions. The LNCT undertook a series of stakeholder engagement events to ascertain what they should be taken into account when they consider the shape and pattern of the session dates in order to maximise learning for our young people. The sessions also offered an opportunity for participants to design their favoured pattern. There then followed 3 questionnaires, one for the public, one for non-teaching staff and one for teaching staff, with the responses analysed and proposals made. And these proposals will have been approved by the LNCT at their full committee on the 22nd of May 2018. And we have John to speak to it. Is there anything you want to add, John?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this was a hot potato over the winter period, shall we say. It seemed to grow arms and legs. In very good faith, the LNCT undertook. They set the holiday and session dates 3 years in advance, and obviously that's to support families to make decisions about holiday patterns and so on, which is clearly important. Next year there was a bit of a hiccup. When that was set, there was a hiccup because the exam diet was brought forward, and therefore there was a risk to some of our young people. So we made an amendment, the LNCT made an amendment fairly quickly to ensure that we could get that resolved as soon as possible. We didn't actually have time to bring that to Civil Committee, but we think that the amendment has been the least disruptive to our families and communities. The 3 years from 1920 through to 21-22 was a pause for thought, and I think what the LNCT felt would be appropriate would be to think about, well, what is the shape, what's the current shape and pattern? We do know that traditionally across the UK, there tends to be a more Victorian sort of holiday pattern, very much still with the tatty howkin holidays and the long summers and whatever else. But there was a lot of things that are emerging in terms of what we're doing with our young people. We really had an eye on the GIRFEC agenda, and I think the amount of time some of our most vulnerable youngsters were spending away from school, from their learning. We clearly have an absolute focus, a determined focus on closing the poverty-related attainment gap. We were also looking at that wider poverty agenda, and again, how long were some of our young people spending away from somewhere that can actually have food at lunchtime, which was being provided through our school kitchens. Health and wellbeing statistics was also something that we talked about. You know, the absence statistics for our staff, but also for our young people. You know, when we're having extended lengthy terms, what were the patterns looking like? So we had a wee look at that as well. We looked at some of our exclusion data, and when did we have our peaks and our troughs? When were the high exclusion times? Again, we're determined to keep our young people in our schools as much as we possibly can, so that was an important factor. And I think another one that's worth highlighting is the increase to 1,140 hours of early learning in childcare. So our young people are coming in for school for a whole day, and pretty much for some of them throughout the whole year, and yet when they go to school, then they were actually having extended periods away from school. Having said all of that, there are certain parameters that can't be shifted. Teachers work and teach for 195 days a year, 5 of which are inset days. They have 66 days holiday, which are comprised of 40 days holiday and 26 days of school closure. The 26 days of school closure, just to assure members, is to ensure the children aren't in school, nor are the teachers, but it's to ensure that proper things like maternity pay and all that kind of stuff is calculated appropriately. So there was I think it was 10 engagement sessions across the authority in January and February, which raised a huge amount of interest, I have to say. We were inundated, I think, with people coming along. And what those sessions were intended to do was to try and encourage the general public, the stakeholders, to think about, well, what did the LNCT need to think about? On top of that list, what else do they need to think about when they're setting the holiday and session dates within the parameters that were described? We also gave the folks that attended an opportunity to try and do their own shaping of the pattern with those parameters. So we set up a lot of laptops and spreadsheets and so on, so people could have the chance to try it, to see if whether they could get a pattern that they thought was worth sending in and sharing with us. We then had an analysis of all that information, and thereafter we sent out some questionnaires. We sent out questionnaires which were targeted in a consultation activity. We sent out one to the general public, I think, as the Chair has mentioned. We sent one to teaching staff, and we sent one to non-teaching staff, all slightly tweaked, bearing in mind what they had the opportunity to decide upon. Once that information came back in, and you can see the numbers were very, very high with regards to that. Lots of people have got lots of opinions about how the holidays and session dates should look. The LNCT poured through that information that came back in and have proposed the 3 session dates that have been appended to the report today. So we're looking for elected member approval on those dates. The LNCT have certainly agreed that they are appropriate for their members, and would now seek elected member simple approval that those dates can now go out to be published prior to the summer holidays so that people can start their planning for a year in advance.
Thanks, John. Members? Nobody indicating they want to speak, so can we move to the recommendations? 2.1, can we agree the school holiday and session dates for 2019, 2021, 21-22? And can we note 2.2? Okay. So moving on to item 7 on page 195, Service Redesign, Instrumental Music Tuition Interim Report. This report provides further information on the service redesign as requested at the CIPL Committee in January 2018. Following engagement with instructors, musical specialists, head teachers and community music groups, it is necessary to have a transitional period of 1 year to allow for the functions to be efficiently and effectively managed within each of the 4 areas. An area musical profile has been shared with staff, providing comprehensive information on uptake, instruments, staff and current costs. Based on this, each area will identify an area lead to oversee the development of a music plan for the area. Music instructors will be managed by schools from August 2018, and allocation of staff and invoicing will remain a central function during the transitional period. To provide parity with community music groups in the Youth Music Initiative, it is proposed to waive higher charges for instruments. And we have Liz Baxter to speak to the report. Is there anything you want to add, Liz? Members? Katie?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I would welcome to get the report back, the interim report back on this. I've got various questions and I would like to maybe even add in a few suggestions to the recommendations. But if I just go quickly through some of my observations, the first one of which is on page 195, the wording of paragraph 3.21. The service redesign was the acceptance that an area approach is preferred to a loss of instrumental tuition. There was never, certainly from an administration point of view, going to be a loss of. I understand that the Conservative budget had to take out the musical instrumental service, but certainly from the administration's point of view, and certainly from my own group's manifesto, we were never looking to actually remove that service. So actually that's sort of wording is not quite factually correct in there. But also looking forward to this, I think it's really important that we speak to as many people as possible. And I would certainly say on the following page at 3.2.5, on the last paragraph, it says engagement with parents and pupils will be undertaken within each area, and I wonder whether it's appropriate to add in the parent-teachers associations and use the PTAs that are a good network and know what's going on in their schools and how we can actually get feedback from them. So it's actually to add that in if possible. It's also acknowledging, and it is acknowledged in the report, that instructors, which they're teachers, they're teaching a skill, they're not just instructing, but our teachers are allocated to the geographical areas, but they might have to actually go between those. And actually, how are we expecting people to manage their travel expenses? I know there's a suggestion that the instructors should be using pool cars where possible, but it's actually acknowledging that sometimes pool cars aren't available. Certainly in my own ward down in the Mackers, if we're asking tutors to travel to our schools within can we actually acknowledge that it may be appropriate to pay travel expenses and not expect to use pool cars? And my final point is actually, can we have a report earlier than early next year, and potentially even a report to the area committees? Because if we're taking it down to our locations, it would be appropriate to report back to our area committees so we can actually put more information back into the locality and carry on with that decentralising. But I do welcome that this is a good interim report and we're making progress, and I hope that it actually leads us to a really positive outcome. Thank you.
Liz?
Right. So parent council certainly would be welcome. As regards the pool car
We currently plan a year ahead for the instructors, and we work with fleet management, and we book pool cars a year in advance for them. And then it's the instructor's responsibility to cancel if there's change to plan. We've already had discussions with fleet management about putting pool cars in each area as the area plans develop. And certainly response to area committee would make sense.
And just for clarification then, a slightly early report rather than saying early next year, you would like a report, a further report in the autumn perhaps, in December maybe?
I just feel that in our report here it says early 2019. Well, if that's March, that's 10 months away, yeah. And obviously, you know, even 6 months, you know, even if it's January, excuse me, that's still 8 months away. And actually, it's just, this is an interim report, it's just to keep us updated. We have a standing report just to keep us in the loop, so to speak. It doesn't need to be a large report, but just where have we been, where are we, and how far are we off to getting this correct?
So that would be an interim report to the meeting on the 27th of November. Just a brief update.
Yes, it's as long as it's a progress report, because schools won't be in for long after the holidays for that to develop that.
I think, Chair, we want to try and avoid too many standing reports that come up every time at committee, otherwise the list becomes too long. But on this particular issue, even if members could receive a briefing in the autumn in terms of how progress is going, with the acknowledgement that we will bring a full interim report either towards the end of the year or in January. That's okay. Thanks.
Happy with that? Yep. Okay, I've got nobody else indicating they want to speak, so can we move to the recommendations on page 195? Can we note 2.1 and 2.2? And can we agree 2.3 and 2.4 with a briefing coming to members in the autumn? Happy with that? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 8 on page 199, early learning and childcare planning for the expansion towards 1,140 hours by 2020-2021, and this is an update which comes to all meetings of SIPL. So we have Liz, Rosie and Lauren to speak to this. Is there anything you wish to add to the report?
The multi-year funding has been confirmed, and we expect to be able to deliver within the funding. The independent financial review is underway, and there's been further engagement with the communities in Stranraer to discuss the expansion there. And we have as in the paper, we have the criteria developed for allowing providers to access capital funding grants. And that's still with legal at the moment, though.
Hale?
Yeah, very briefly, I mean, we've obviously made great progress with this, but there's a lot of challenges ahead with the entire delivery, and I don't think anybody's naive about that. And I know it's been a massive piece of work for yourself and all local authorities. It does say at 3.3 that procurement of ELC services cannot commence until completion of the independent financial review. Is that going to have an impact on the proposed delivery, particularly with our PVI sector and what we're able to deliver in the sort of upcoming months, or is it actually going to all fall into line in a fairly short space of time?
If I might, Chair, the key issue there was at the last committee, obviously we agreed that we'd have the independent review carried out. There was then a view from the procurement team at the council that it would be inappropriate to go with a full procurement without knowing what the final rate's going to be or what's going to be recommended to council. So with that timing, really we're working under the status quo just now, and therefore that doesn't create any risk, and that youngsters have enrolled and we've got capacity sorted out. The main challenge really would be for anyone else who'd wanted to come onto the procurement framework who wasn't already there, and that's a bit delayed because of the time it has taken to do the independent review. But the reason the independent review is taking longer is because the private providers asked for individual meetings with the reviewer as well as collective meetings. And therefore, rather than not agree to that, we've agreed to that because what we want to get to a stage is that everybody's got full confidence as we move forward in future years, and we're not back here every single year talking about a rate, that we've got a financial model that will work. So it's worth taking a little bit more time to make sure that that's really clear, that everybody agrees with it. We feel it's fair, but it did have a knock-on effect for procurement in the sense of anybody new who wasn't already on the framework, but it doesn't represent a risk to the kids at the moment. Okay.
Andrew?
Thanks for letting in, Chair. I'm on 3.6.2, and I welcome that officers have met with head teachers in Stranraer. However, I'll go further to the end of that bullet point. The projected capacity gap is small and would warrant expansion in one school only up to a maximum of 24 places. I've met with officers and they're aware that the PVI sector are interested in this gap, but it says one school and that sounds like a fait accompli there.
Liz?
I agree, it should say one provider.
Ian?
Thank you, Chairman. It was on, maybe I wasn't close enough. The independent review was commissioned on the 27th of February. We're now in, to me, almost into June, and I do appreciate the reasons for the delay. The report says that if there's any change agreed, it will be applied from August 2018. That doesn't actually say that the review will be completed by then. That could be a retrospective award. I would really like assurance that this review will be completed before this date.
Again, Chair, I can speak personally because I've met the reviewer. I can't give any assurance about that. The reviewer will take as long as it takes to do this properly. But we would anticipate that it will be completed before August. But even if, for example, a report had to come where members had to take the decision about a rate, even if that was September, it would be backdated to the middle of August. That's what we're very, very clear about. But the reviewer is very keen to meet with all the providers who've expressed interest, do a thorough job with them, get their trust, make sure that we're not back here every single year, and it will take him as long as it's going to take him. We can't guarantee the date at which he will complete that review.
Yeah, if I could come back in briefly. Obviously, if this review doesn't come before August, there will be many of the private providers will have financial difficulty. They are in difficulty now. Do we have any numbers of private providers that have actually just pulled out at this stage, or indicating they're pulled out?
I think Liz can probably say more. Most of the private providers who express concerns are actually looking to expand at the moment and have asked for more business. So that's probably not tying up with the idea that they might have been pulling out. I don't think anybody has pulled out from the group other than a volunteer group. But again, what I would again reaffirm that the gap between, for example, 20th of August when the rate would go up and perhaps September, Councillor, when the report might come at latest to you, is not a huge one. It's less than a month and it'll be backdated at that time, assuming that the rate does increase.
Nobody else wishing to come in, so can we move to the recommendations on 199? Can we note 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4 and 2.5? Okay. So moving on to item 5 on page 225. The consultation period for the early learning and childcare service model for 2020 is 29th of March to 29th of June this year, and the consultation includes funding following the child, a new national standard, living wage commitment, and transitional arrangements. All providers have been encouraged to respond to the consultations. Officers' response to the 8 consultation questions is outlined in Appendix 2, and this incorporates the response from the Chair of Dumfries and Galloway Parent Forum and Enterprise and D&G. So it's Liz and Rosie to speak this again. I think it's a very good, very thorough.
It's just this is the last committee before the response has to be put in, so we thought we'd chair it to begin with.
Members? Gail?
Sorry, Jeff. I maybe should have picked this up in the last report, but I don't think it really matters. It's really around the delivery by 2020 of the 2-year-old targets. I know it's an area that has caused quite a lot of difficulty for local authorities, and there's been quite an ambitious target set of around about 60% for 2-year-olds. Now, appreciating that we're in May 2018, many of the kids that we're talking about aren't even born yet. Within the consultation process and our response to government, can we ask explicitly what government's doing to work with the UK government in respect of DWP and identifying potentially vulnerable children? Because I think that's a fairly important piece of work that probably needs to be done at government level, not local government level. But I do think it's worth highlighting to government at this stage that we need to have the support and the robustness of knowing that we are going to be able to identify those 2-year-olds, because that's the crucial time. That's the area that if we're not getting them at 2, we've lost them by 3 and 4. So that bit has to be successful. And actually, I think the 60% target should be 100%, but we have to have attainable targets. So I just wonder if we can put somewhere within the response our concerns around lack of information coming from the DWP in respect of vulnerable families, which would help us to identify those 2-year-olds potentially, even though they're not born yet.
Happy to do that, yeah. It's something which I noted on page 258 of the report, in the section headed All Providers, and taking into account what we've been saying in terms of the independent review of costs, etc. It's interesting to note that delivering the funding entitlement must ensure that they are able to demonstrate, when required, that their business model continues to be financially viable through the provision of annually audited accounts and forward-looking financial forecasts and budgets, which is effectively what we're doing with the independent reviewer. But that will be part of the grounds on which you can apply for the additional funding, which I think is very reasonable. So we've got no one else looking to speak. So as I say, I think it's a very good response, and I think it highlights some of the difficulties which we may account in rural areas, which urban areas won't have to the same extent in terms of flexibility, etc., and costings. Therefore, moving to the recommendations, can we agree the recommendations as set out in the paper? Yeah. Okay. Okay, moving on to item 10 on page 281. This paper is in relation to the asset class projects across schools and gives the committee a summary of investments from 2017-18 as well as an updated priority list. This is the overall strategy and approach which should be presented to this committee. If members have any specific items on individual schools, they should take this up directly with officers James. Officers are also asking for the gymnasium at Douglas Hewitt High School to be considered surplus to the needs of education, and in doing so, this will then follow the property and architectural service process to consider any wider needs across the council and community. So we have Claire and Lauren to speak to it. Is there anything you want to add, Claire?
I just want to note one item, and apologies to committee. Appendix 1 seems to have lost its numbers for some reasons. Apologies, we'll get that appendix recirculated after the meeting. Happy to take any questions.
Katie?
Thank you, Chair. It's just really for confirmation in terms of the recommendation 2.3 with the disposal of gymnasium block at the Douglas Hewitt. Will that go to area committee, and will there be an opportunity if a community group wanted to come forward for a community asset transfer? It's just to confirm that, how does that process work? I know that there was a change in policy and we have put that to go back to area committee, but I just want to confirm that, because obviously if there's a community group that has a use, it would be useful to support them in that.
So obviously from our side, we declare it surplus to the service need. It goes to property services, and property services, understand, engage to see if there's any community interest. So there should be an opportunity for a community to explore a possibility of using that facility in the future.
So Chair, just for confirmation, the actual wording of the recommendation should be amended to say agree to the declaring of the gymnasium block as surplus to education. And thereafter that process follows.
David?
Just a cheeky comment, Chair, please. On page 285, could you use larger print the next time, please? The specs are not strong enough.
Okay.
Chair, just with regard to the recommendation at 2.1, how can we note a blank sheet? Or is that more of the accountancy that we received last night, where I had trouble making that add up as well?
What we're asking you to note in 3.1 is the overall financial position in terms of the overall spend per year, and either surplus or the monies that are still getting carried over. So we're just noting in terms of table 1, that's the focus, the overall item.
Chair, I would read the note the financial position as detailed in 3.1 is detailed in Appendix 1. It isn't here, we cannot note that.
Okay, so what I would suggest then is to update the table, update the wording to say, to note the financial position as detailed in table 1 in 3.1.1.
Chair, but how can we then agree 3.1.1 when we don't know what the figures are in 3.1 because the appendix is blank? The figures aren't there to back up the statements in 3.11. So I'd move that we defer this until the report is complete.
Chair, can I just for point of clarification, 3.1, it actually gives funding. We've got a table, which indeed is correct. Lee pointed out that there's no details on that, but 3.1 actually has the funding figures in it, in the actual wording of the paragraph. It may not be in the table, but 3.1 does have figures there. So I'm confused as to why we would defer this.
Chair, those figures could be £5 and £10. We don't have the evidence to back that up. And if we are here, we've got an auditor here who should be taking the fact that we are going to pass something when we don't have the actual information in front of us. I don't think that'll go down well in an audit.
Well,
Chair, can I maybe make a suggestion? We've got the table here with the figures, so we can, if you can give us 5 minutes, we can get that photocopied and passed around to everybody. And just to focus really that this committee's role is about the strategic overview in terms of the overall funding expenditure. We are delegated as officers in terms of the minutiae and detail, but what we want to try and be is open and transparent, which is Appendix 1, but we can certainly get that copied quickly and circulated.
Yeah, can we defer discussion of this item until such times you have that, and we'll move on to item 11, and then come back to item 10. Item 11 on page 293, John Wallace Trust Scheme 1981. Right. Applications for session 2017-18. This is the annual report of the John Wallace Trust, which allocates a travel grant and the bursary for eligible pupils. I'm pleased to see there are more applications this year. To aid transparency, we have not submitted this as an exempt report, but have removed specific pupil details to allow us to publish the report as normal. Officers can assure members that all applicants meet the criteria as set. We now have Gillian to speak to the report. Is there anything you want to add, Gillian?
I think there was some difficult, well, not practical issues with regards to the exemption of the paper, but we thought it would be simpler for all concerned to actually, in the spirit of openness and transparency, to have the paper in its entirety. The reason it was being exempt in previous years is because it had pupil names and addresses within it. I do have copies if any member wishes to see the names and addresses of the pupils, but I can assure members that they all do meet the criteria of the Trust.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. These were one of the, or some of the things we were able to do as a subcommittee. I still think we should go back to the subcommittee. I think that should come as a report on a different day. The only thing I will say today is that I'm happy with Gillian's report, other than we've no addressed the tackling poverty element yet. I think we're still just doing a general allocation. So there's maybe an opportunity to look at tackling poverty within the applications that come before us. And if there's a subcommittee, we'd have some time to discuss that, and it could simply be a subcommittee of this committee, because there are 4 members here present representing the ward. There's Jeff, Tracy, John, Charteris, myself, so it'd be quite easy to make up a subcommittee of this committee that would be able to carry out that function. But I'll leave that to other members to decide. Oh, Ivor's here as well. There you go. So there are absolutely plenty of us to run this as a subcommittee. There's no reason why it can't happen with the will of the parent committee. Maybe we could get a report back, Chair.
Well, I think we can look at that separately out with this particular meeting of the committee. I think all we need to do in this terms is agree the allocations are set out in this report. And in terms of the attacking poverty, and the Dumfries Educational Trust, we did look at how we actually allocate money, and it's now more focused towards those youngsters who receive educational maintenance awards. So perhaps it is something which we could look at, but obviously that's determined to a large extent by the terms of the trust. Okay. So can we move to the recommendations? Can we agree 2.1, approve 2.2, 2.3, agree 2.4, and agree 2.5? Okay. Okay, so item 12 on page 299. This is the leisure services fees and charges. Full Council on the 27th of February 2018, as part of the budget setting process, agreed increases in regard to income generation for leisure activities. These proposals align with the Council's charging framework. The purpose of this report is to present members a 3-year fees and charges strategy in order to manage the 10% increase in income targets for financial years 18-19, 19-20 and 2021. The saving template highlights leisure with a requirement to contribute £60,000 in each of these financial years, totalling £180,000 by year 3. And we have Richard Grieveson and Stuart Bigger to speak to the report. Is there anything you want to add?
Just very briefly, if I may, Chair, just to give members some assurances that the information presented has been the subject of quite some detailed consideration within the service. Obviously, increases to charges that may result in reduction in attendances create subsequent budget pressures as opposed to additional income, which is the intent and the requirement here. So we've spent some time looking at the performance of the services and analysing that data along with national Sports Scotland fees and charges information. It's not, as members will see in terms of the figures in the appendix, the figures have been rounded up or rounded down slightly, basically in terms of making life easy for our customers. But also we've tried to be flexible within the agreed pricing framework. We've tried to be innovative and creative in terms of some of the solutions. The example at 3.1.3, it fits that bill. And also, as some members in the room will appreciate, we're also developing a number of community sports hub management arrangements across the region where we're working very closely with communities to try and mitigate any increase in fees and charges, with them potentially taking some more responsibility in regard to operation, maintenance, upkeep, etc., that might help to offset some of the additional costs in a true spirit of partnership and community engagement. So these charges came into effect the 1st of April. We've not seen a significant reduction at all in regard to the attendances as a consequence of fees and charges, and I think across the piece it's been handled pretty well and been reasonably well positively received, members. So through you, Chair, happy to take any questions along with Stuart members might have.
Thanks, Richard. Members? Katie and then Ivor.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just want to say I'm really pleased to see on 3.14 on page 300 that we're looking to introduce a family membership and that it's being developed, and I think that's really positive. I just want to ask, and maybe I should declare an interest, are we going to have single parent family memberships? Because certainly as a single parent I often find that the family memberships don't actually affect me because it's actually for 2 adults. So just to ask, is there any element there for single parents in their family makeup?
Just to say, Chair, that yes, we're looking at a whole range of different scenarios, and that's one that we'll absolutely make sure that's in the mix.
Chair, it's just with regard to the risk mitigation. When you do put up your charges 10%, now on one person doing one thing, 10% might not be too much. But if that one person's doing 4 or 5 activities, so your 100,000 possible participants are actually 25,000, it puts a big strain on resources to families. What did you take into account for that to make sure that someone who uses 4 or 5 different elements aren't going to be affected? Because I think there was a study done and it's 10,000 hours training to become a world champion. Now, if it's 10% increase in that, cost-wise for a family to get their child to a world champion, might not get many world champions coming out of Dumfries and Galloway for putting them off, and the training's going to be longer.
Richard?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor Hislop makes a really interesting and valid point. It's a real challenge for us in terms of looking at that as as an issue, because what we've required to do is really focus on affordability and making sure that our most vulnerable communities and individuals can access reductions and easy access payments, etc., etc. Sometimes, and what we've found in the frontline service is that actually those that can afford the service shout the loudest. So it's a real challenge for our staff in terms of making sure that there's a science behind what we're doing. In terms of talented athletes, we continue to try and signpost to external grant funding and any internal grant funding that we've got to help and support the talented athlete. But again, it's about targeting the resources we have on our most vulnerable customers in terms of the council's priorities. So I appreciate that's not perhaps answers all the questions. We've had to try and mitigate risk where we can with this additionality. But in managing the services, sometimes it's through choice that our customers come to 3, 4, 5 and 6 activities as opposed to whether they can afford to do that or not.
Katie?
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back on that point? My understanding is the membership, and certainly the Profile Plus, you pay a monthly fee and you can go to as many activities as you want. So therefore, the point raised by Councillor Hislop isn't actually as valid because you're not paying 10 lots of sessions, because if you pay a monthly fee, and that's only gone up, well, if we look here in the memberships on page 305, it's not going up with each activity you do. It's just for clarification on that, because my understanding is with certainly the membership, you can use the gym, you can use classes, you can use swimming, you can use the sauna, the steam rooms, and it's all included in that one price. Is that correct? So.
That is correct, Chair. My apologies, Councillor Hagman. Yes, one of the examples of mitigation, I guess, is the fact that we now have membership schemes where individuals can come as frequently as they wish for their membership fee, and they're obviously payable by a direct debit in terms of an easy payment mechanism as well.
So does that cover ice skating, curling, football, etc., that membership, whereby they could then go and play football, curling, ice skating, or is it just for the gym activities?
Richard? Some, not all of the aforementioned. Predominantly and primarily it's about gym and fitness memberships and the conventional fitness memberships as you would understand them. We do, however, though, through partnerships with various clubs, have a direct debit scheme for some of those activities that I mentioned.
Thanks, Chair. I think we should see this report in the context of the next one, which is a physical activity strategy, and also context that we're really trying to tackle obesity within the area as well. So I think we've got evidence that shows that making charges more affordable, then we get greater uptake, and that's been achieved by what we've done over the last couple of years. Now we're moving in the wrong direction, because I think I've had lots of complaints from parents who have faced extra charge for the children's activities, and it's usually the ones that are just above the line who don't qualify for free or reduced use charges. I know that there's not been evidence at the moment, but I think we're planning to increase the charges considerably more in coming years. I think perhaps the administration and other budget setters should look at that maybe when the budget process comes along, because I think we've got to be consistent. We've just had a report on musical instruments and tuition, and there is a sort of attitude there that we want to encourage everybody to take part in that, and to encourage people from lower incomes income families to do that. So I don't know if that fits well with being consistent with that. Also, the tackling poverty money has been used to make sure that children in schools have got access to technical and home economic lessons, and they don't have to pay for the materials there. So I think to be consistent, we should be trying as much as possible to get people from low-income families to take part in these, and I think we need to review that when we come to budget setting the next time.
So we all know where we are with regard to the cuts in council spending, and we look forward to seeing the independent budget in due course. But in terms of tackling poverty, etc., and increasing access, Richard?
Chair, through you, certainly we're doing quite a lot of work with the Tackling Poverty team in regard to accessing services across leisure and sport. I think it's probably also fair to say that our easy access scheme and the range of different individuals who may be on different elements of benefit is probably one of the most far-reaching that I've seen across Scotland's 32 authorities. So we certainly do target where we can those more vulnerable communities. We've just extended the easy access scheme to include coached activities, which we've never done before, and are aligning that with young people who benefit from free school meals. So certainly a key theme. Councillor Brodie's quite right, and something that we need to make sure that we keep on top of.
Dick, you want to come back?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it'll be in the independent budget. Certainly it'll be in the Liberal Democrat one. But being serious for a moment, why can't we use some of the anti-poverty money to reduce the cost of the leisure services? Can we set some of that money against the cost of leisure services? I think that's a serious question.
It's something which could be considered, provided we can identify the budget. Okay, John?
Specifically in regard to fees and charges, Councillor Charteris, these are the fees and charges that will be in place across the region, including DG1 when DG1 opens. So these will be the charges that will be applied for that facility alongside all of the others, given members made a previous commitment to harmonise fees and charges across leisure and sport provision across the region. The matter in regard to costs of DG1 and capital works is separate to the revenue budget consequences of the savings before you today.
Ivor?
Chair, it's a bit of information. Supervised outreach 1 hour and supervised outreach 2 hour coaching. Easy access is more expensive than junior. Is there a junior easy access that should be in there as well, or is that outreach coaching aimed more at adults?
Thank you, Chair. To answer your question, Councillor Hislop, the junior figure, to be honest with you, primarily all of the outreach activity, much as we have an adult charge, is actually aimed at juniors, so like active schools, etc., work that's done. Easy access is based on adults with, say, learning difficulties, something like that, for example, that would be as part of that. So in truth, the junior fee is actually the fee that would be charged. So that would be the fee that would be applied, so that's why it's at the lower price point.
It's more the case if you have a junior who would benefit from an easy access payment rather than paying the $220, there should be a fee, an EA fee for them. That was the kind of case. Should they have an easy access fee in there so that they can access those activities?
Through you, Chair, I guess two comments. Yes, that's certainly something we'll look at and implement where appropriate. Perhaps Lee can update on the next paper as well. I mean, the active schools and community sport, which is predominantly where the outreach coached activities are, we tend to liaise very closely with schools and clusters of schools, and in terms of the theme of accessing other funding such as anti-poverty, the PEF funding that's recently gone to schools has been used to offset some of those activities to make sure that they are affordable for all young people. But we'll certainly have a look at that, Councillor Hislop.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I would echo your comments in as much as, well, anti-poverty funding is fully committed in this financial year as a result of the budget. I'm sure we would want to consider carefully any suggestions that come forward from other groups and how we could perhaps increase it or allocate it in ways that we haven't yet been able to do so. I think I'd also just gently and as kindly as I can this late in the morning or even into the early afternoon as it is, remind one or two members in particular that the budget is a balance of measures taken in its entirety. And so, for example, we considered that it was a good idea for people to be able to get public transport to these venues, which had another budget passed not have been the case. And we also considered that it was sensible to allocate, to allocate resource to try and address the documented problems that we have with barriers to attainment and achievement in school because of the cost of materials and the cost of, particularly in the senior phase, of going on excursions, etc., which are out with school hours. It's easy to pick to pieces the one particular suite of measures. I think it's worth reminding some members who have already forgotten, particularly who voted for it, of the entirety of the budget and what we were setting out to achieve. But I think I would probably close by reiterating your point that if suggestions are likely to come forward on how we could increase tackling poverty money and allocate some of it towards some of this activity, I'm sure we'd be happy to consider them.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, so can we move to the recommendations on page 299? Can we note 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3? And if we move to item 13 on page 307, Dumfries and Galloway Active, a Sport and Physical Activity Strategy 2018-23 Action Plan. At our January meeting of this committee, we approved our Council's new Sport and Physical Activity Strategy covering the period 2018 to 2023. The strategy sets the vision for a more physically active and healthy Dumfries and Galloway. 4 members today is the action plan and how this strategy will be delivered for the year ahead, with a deliberate focus to contribute towards our Council's priorities, assisting our most vulnerable, particularly the elderly, and those with long-term conditions to remain active and independent, supporting our children to healthy and active lives, focusing on inclusion and disability sport, and supporting the community sports hub approach across our communities where possible. The report also provides members with details on the operating structure for our active schools and community sports programme, following recent restructuring. And we have Richard Greaves and Lee Seaton to speak to the report. Is there anything you want to add?
Very quickly, Chair, just 2 points of clarity, further information for members. The template refers to, in the final column, reporting to both SIPL and Area Committee in certain areas. Just for clarification, the region-wide data will be presented to this committee, but the area-specific data broken down per each geographical area will come to each area committee. I know members are very keen to receive that, so that's the clarity on that one. And secondly, having just concluded the area committee reporting cycle, a common theme has been the need to further enhance community access of schools. I'm pleased to report to members that discussion is ongoing with colleagues within children, young people and lifelong learning to improve the process and promote access to schools through that. So that's certainly something we'll be happy to report back on to members, but it's been a key theme across all 4 areas.
Thanks, Richard. Members? Okay, so can we go to the recommendations on 307? Can we agree 2.1? Can we note 2.2? And can we note 2.3? Okay, so we now have the photocopies available for the item 10, so they can be distributed. And I note that Councillor McKee's request's already been initiated, the larger type. So I'll give members a few minutes to look at these, about 5 minutes. Okay, members, given that we've already agreed that we are going to discuss individual schools as part of this committee meeting, and they can be taken up with officers outside the meeting, I'm happy to move to the recommendations. Ivor?
Chair, the figures at the bottom of the page are 606, 725, yet it comes across as 610. Now, I would accept rounding up or rounding down. However, within the next year, it's quite specific at 305.15. There seems to be a discrepancy here. Where does that 3,275 either disappear to or come from?
It's a timing issue in terms of where the asset class capital investment programme sits at this point in time compared to where this paper copy report that you have just now is produced by corporate finance. The figures in the report itself are produced by Property and Architectural Services. So even looking at the report itself with the overcommitment next financial year of 305,015, it's actually now increased. To this point today, it's sitting at around 653,000. So it's about timing of when those 2 figures were taken.
Chair, but if we look at 3.1, the financial outturn for the asset class in the financial year is detailed in Appendix 1, which is 606. Now, what I'm told from that report there, or from the officer, was this was new information. How did you get to 610? Appendix 1 is 606. When you're writing the report, it should be the same figure.
We can look into where the missing thousands are and come back on that one, but in terms of the figure in the report is the correct figure. Inside the detailed report on the schools, there'll be things like design fees and other associated fees that don't sit within a project inside that report, but that will be included in the overall bottom line figure.
Chair, can I suggest that the numbers in terms of discrepancy here are probably less than about 0.1% of the overall spend. The paper is not asking you to agree to anything other than the declaring of the gymnasium block as surplus. The paper simply asks you to note the current position. If the current position changes on a daily basis, then we would be noting where that was, but we'd be happy to send out a further briefing if there's been any update in the 2 weeks between writing the paper and where we are. But we're not asking for members to agree anything, it's simply to note the position.
Ronnie?
Could we ask for an update on the figures since Ivor asked his question first?
Could I also note for members, referring to a previous report, that we've all now aged by more than 2 hours this morning, but hopefully our happiness hasn't tumbled in the way that the first report talked about. But certainly we could provide a further update because it does change on a weekly basis, and what I would ask my officers to do is to compare what's in the report there, what's in the appendix, and what the latest figures are, and give out a final briefing to you within the next week, if that's helpful.
Chair, it's just from the fact that today we have a discrepancy. Last night we lost 20% of our cash budget out of common good, where nobody can tell me where that went from. I know it's a different committee. We had audited accounts which didn't add up, and the auditor passed them from 2016 and 17. And now, where are we going? We need to be accurate with these, and they need to be dead on. If we're going to come with any figures and change them, but oh well, it's changed this week. When you write the report, you do the appendix. It has to be correct.
Chair, I'm happy to respond to that and take that as a point in terms of going back. And what I'm hearing from the committee here is, you know, as Larden said, one set of figures is from our property services colleagues, and one of the figures is from our financial services colleagues, and the two systems time-wise are not aligned. But we'll actually take that point on back and go and see if we can align the two systems so that you get the same reports on the same day, so you have that alignment. But what we're giving you as assurances, it's just the timeline discrepancy.
Okay. Gail?
No, okay, Jeff, and I'm sorry, Colin, if you shake your head. We have a report in front of us which we've had a week to scrutinise and read and look at, which didn't have the figures that we were required to scrutinise and look at. I totally appreciate that we've now got the updated figures and they now don't correlate with what's contained within para 3.1, but I think it's entirely appropriate as elected members to raise that as a scrutiny issue. And it would have been much better if the officers had simply said, we're terribly sorry, there's some information missing in Appendix 1, we're going to print you off a new copy. The numbers will be slightly different on that document compared to what's in the report. We will not let that happen again. And I think that that would have been a far better way to deal with it.
Well, can I suggest we defer 2.1 at the moment, and that can come back to the next meeting of SIPL committee, and we agree 2.2 and 2.3.
Chair, all I would add there is that in 3.1 there's a slight amount of rounding up, and the figures at the bottom of the table are very much in line with what's in 3.1. We were asking you to note the overall position at the end of the year around the 5.5 million, the 4.9 million. Those figures are detailed, but they've been rounded in 3.1. I'm not sure there's any point in deferring, because the next time anything comes back to you, it's a very different position anyway. It's simply to note the current position that we're in and simply say that we want to take away from this committee the fact that you've asked that these two reports come with exactly the same timing, so that even though it's a matter of a very few thousand out of 4.9 million, that doesn't happen the next time, and happy to take that on board.
I was just going to say we should be noting it anyway, but I think the language is that's being used about discrepancies and that. I think the adjustments, it's a timing issue, so it's not an actual discrepancy. And when we actually get these reports the next time, there won't be actual figures, there won't be accurate figures, because things will have moved on for the 2 or 3 weeks that the actual they've been given us. So there won't be always that minor adjustment, a couple of £1,000 here and a couple of £1,000 there. So you've got to make it be sensible at things as well. But the timing of the reports should become together.
Katie?
Thank you. I'll be very brief. It's just to check that the updated table with the figures is going to be added into the minutes for the online, because we mentioned that all our information is available to anybody to access it. We've got these paper ones. Do I need to hang on to this paper one to keep this information, or will it be amended in the... Perfect. Thank you.
It will be updated, yeah.
In the light of the advice from the director, can we note 2.1, note the financial position as detailed in 3.1 to 3.11? You'll be pleased to hear I've got no further business, so go out and play in the sunshine.